welcome to Tea with Mo. It's the 17th of August. I'm joined by Allison Navarro, co-founder of the Inner Light Meditation Centre. Great friend, great colleague, great mentor, and also somebody who has shown me the way, a way shower, a beacon into many areas of my life, and one of them certainly is what we're going to talk about this evening. And it's a combination. And I think this is sort of part two of our last session, where we had so much to get through, and I don't think we even got to attachment styles, even though we have had this conversation before.
Or circle of security.
Or circle of security. Yeah. And I think maybe even last year we had this conversation, from a different lens, because last time we spoke about this, it was all about secure attachment with somebody outside of you.
Yes.
Whereas now we're talking about secure attachment both outside, and inside, internal perception of self, or not perception of self, internal space of self-energy, and then also wanted to expand it into the non-dual lens of your attachment style with life as a whole. Because life is the external, it's the internal, and it's everything that is then put together. So we wanted to explore attachment styles, and as we explore attachment styles, talking about that, and certainly 1969, 1970, John Bowlby founded it, theorised about it, and so there's been... Actually, I was born, you were 1969, I was born in 1970, so it's as old as we are.
Excuse me? I was 1970
Oh, you're 1970,
as well.
okay, right. So there you go, right. We'll edit that bit, so that's okay. And you were born in 1970 as well as I was, so we are as old as this theory.
That's right.
Is
yes.
As well. IFS is coming on 40 years.
40 years.
Now.
It's really been in the last 5, 6, 7 years that it's really got traction.
Yeah, and a beautiful philosophy, beautiful model, something that I guess for me has been a bit of a jigsaw piece in this accumulation of my worldview as well as my self-concept view, that sort of thing too.
And speaking about 40 years, we know that there is a 40-year research gap. So something that is a different paradigm shift, it takes 40 years for that to then become embedded into mainstream understanding. So, and here we are, and this is what we're seeing in the last approximately 5, 6 or so years, that internal family systems is now really starting to gain that traction.
Yeah. Right. So I guess ultimately, and I'll hand this over to you very soon, this concept of attachment theory is based upon having and creating a secure attachment with your primary caregiver. So your primary caregiver, through John Bowlby's perspective, was the parent or the guardian who was looking after you. Most of my attachment was actually created with my uncles and aunties and my grandparents, because I was born in the Philippines, and when I was about 6 months of age, my parents left me in the Philippines with my family, and then they went to New Guinea. And then they returned when I was about 2.5 years of age. And then took me back to New Guinea. So it's no wonder I didn't really have a great attachment to my mother and father, or I now understand why I had that type of relationship with my mother and father. And through inquiring and developing an understanding of this really then shines a light on a lot of the behaviours that I've exhibited within my relationships and my intimate relationships as well. And it also gives me an understanding of how my parts were created. Richard Swartz talks about parts being created from attachment wounds. So the woundings of your attachments. He labels it bad parenting. So that's where the wounds are actually created, through those attachment styles. And big T and small t traumas as well, being the conduit for that. So John Bowlby, he looked at the primary caregiver as something that was outside of you. And can we create these, and what type of attachment that we have to that? Yeah? IFS looks at your primary caregiver as self. So self energy and parts that are created. So we want to explore the attachment theory as a model, see it from the perspective of self and another self and the type of relationship that we have with people. And then also looking at the IFS model of self and parts, self being the primary caregiver, parts actually being the children in a sense. Yeah? And then also looking at it from another step backwards, if you want to use the analogy of movement and direction, life being the primary caregiver. And us as humanity, us as consciousness, having this human experience being the children.
And you could look at that as either life or source or God or
Universe.
Great Spirit, whatever you like to call it.
Yeah. And while we're doing that too, also bringing in the circle of security model as well, the going out and returning to the loving hands, from the self and other self perspective. The primary caregiver is the one looking after the child goes out and then returns to the loving hands, the caring hands, the nurturing hands of the primary caregiver. An IFS perspective, it's the parts being created from self, and then as we work with our parts and the reharmonising, the reparenting and the reintegration of parts then coming back into self-energy. So that's that circle of security, returning. And then even then from a perspective of life, the universe, life itself is going, here, go out and explore life. Here's the hero's journey. And we will all have a returning home. We have that return home from this perspective of what we call a lifetime, and also multiple lifetimes, and then also from the perspective of being born a fractal of the one creator, going out and exploring life. And then ultimately returning back to the Godhead, if you wanted to look at it from a Buddhist perspective or a Hindu perspective as well too.
We like to look at things from the micro and the macro. There is nothing that it's as above, so below. Just as is happening on the individual self and fractalizing into parts, so too does the self come into this experience, and then when we transition back, we come back into the loving hands of Source.
So they're the 3 points of triangulation that we're going to be looking at within the theories that we have, because they can be overlaid into the spiritual, into the mind, into the body, that sort of thing. Cool. It's all yours now.
It's all mine. You wanted me to speak of attachment?
Attachment, yeah, let's talk about attachment styles.
Attachment styles, well. So with attachment theory, then, so they have done, Mary Ainsworth has done studies long ago around the how they had put children in experiment where they had the parent and the child would be in the room and the parent would leave the room, and depending on what was happening for the child, when the parent left as well as when the parent returned, they were able to I suppose, categorise whether the child had a secure attachment, or whether there was an avoidant attachment, or whether there was an anxious attachment or a disorganised attachment. So there's 4 attachment styles, and more than 50% of the population has a secure attachment, and almost 50% is divvied up into those other attachment styles. So secure attachment, so just going back onto that, it was called a strange situation experiment, that they were able to then see what was happening for the child. And so in a secure attachment, what would normally happen for the child is that the parent would leave the room, the child would be there, would cry, looking for the caregiver, and then the parent would return and the child would be able to soothe. With what happens in avoidant attachment, an avoidant attachment is where the child has learnt that their signal cry is not met with their needs not being soothed. The parent is not actually there. So what you would see is that sometimes the parent would be on Facebook, or maybe not back then, but they would just not be present. They would be attending to other children or other things. And so the child learns, I can't get my needs met, so therefore I'm not going to express them. So in the strange situation, what would happen is that the parent would leave the room, and it would appear as though the child would not be disturbed. But in fact, when they put the monitors on the child, there's a lot of stress that's going on in the system. It's just that the child has learned, if I express my needs, then that's not safe. So not only are they not going to be met, but it might be met with something that's quite negative.
Anger.
Yes.
Berating.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll give you something to cry about, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Stop whinging.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't want to hear that. So even that sort of, there is a response.
That's
and
right.
then there's a felt response that comes from it.
Yes.
And then the child then learns.
Yes.
Probably best not to
Yes.
cry, not to ask for what I want.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And because it's amazing just how attuned babies and like children are. So we're very clever at such a young age. We know how to respond to meet the needs of safety. And so the child learns not to respond, not to request their needs to be met. So that's avoidant. And just to let you know that these attachment styles can be long-lasting. So I personally have had an avoidant attachment style, and it's not to say that I had bad parenting, it's just that my mother had health issues. I was the younger of the siblings. My mother was working. There were other things that were needing to be attended to, and our generation as well. Children were to be seen and not heard. So that was very common for people. It would be the get out of the house and don't return until it's dark. That was just the way that the generation was. So a lot of people had this experience of avoidant attachment styles. You carry that through into your relationships. The other one, so we've got secure, we've got avoidant. The other one is quite the opposite. It's the anxious attachment style. So this is where a parent unknowingly at times will be quite needy and will put that upon the child. There might be and this is where this model, the circle of security, so this is the going out, from loving hands, the going out and the receiving. So I'll just go back to the avoidant attachment style. So loving hands, it's really important for a caregiver to allow the child to go off and explore the world. If we have lots of that and no welcoming of the child back in, it's like, get out of here, it's not 6 o'clock yet, I'll give you something to cry about. We create more of the avoidant attachment style. Yeah? It's important to have both the encouragement to go out as well as welcoming back in. Tell me, what have you found? What have you discovered? Delight in me.
Celebrating.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so when we have a caregiver that is not very good at allowing the child to go off and explore, and it could be really subtle signals of, oh, are you all right, baby? Don't go. You know, the children are very attuned to, oh, I'm safer by meeting my mother's needs or my father's needs. That will keep me safe rather than attending to my own needs. Yeah.
So the child is then more attuning to the parents' anxiety.
Yes.
And then maybe feels as though that's a normalised approach.
Yes. Well, they know no different.
They know no different.
Yes.
So it's my mum's really worried about if I go over there, then I probably should be really worried about
I should be worried too.
So I'm learning from
our caregivers.
My caregiver.
Yes,
yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so then what happens is that we tend to have this consideration for the other person's needs over ourselves at the expense of ourselves.
Yes.
Whereas in avoidant,
Yeah.
we have the attention like that our needs and you don't matter.
Yeah. So I'm a people pleaser.
Yes.
Have been for a very long time. And it makes sense then that I consider others more than I consider myself. I consider how I can be of value to others, so then I am valuable, so I'm then, in a sense, feel safe.
Yes.
So the people-pleasing part of me is actually part of an anxious attachment.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I love how you mentioned the people-pleasing part of me, because this is not a topic just on attachment. Our primary focus of this is to talk about internal family systems and how that interacts from, or how that was formed because of our attachment styles.
So there's an avoidant part of you. Yes. Not. So maybe can we also then propose that attachment styles are actually a series of parts.
Yes.
Not who we are as self.
No, because the self is pure, is whole, is confident, it has all of those qualities that we discussed last.
It doesn't feel anxious.
No.
It doesn't have to avoid.
It's calm.
It's very safe. It's very
yes.
secure within itself.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so we've spoken briefly of the secure attachment, avoidant attachment, anxious attachment, and the other one is the combination of those other two insecure attachments. So where we have a parent that sometimes was avoidant or sometimes was critical or might be verbally aggressive, not there, and then sometimes was really clingy. Come here, baby, I love you. So there's a lot of confusion in the system. The child doesn't understand what the weather's going to be like today. And it's very disorientating to a developing brain. And so this is where we often see a lot of the pathologizing.
Maladaptive behaviours that we would
and diagnoses, for example, for borderline personality disorder, because there are so many parts that were created because there was so much confusion, and without a primary caregiver helping you to understand self, helping to regulate that child.
Give context.
Yes. Helping to understand emotions.
Yes.
We as children are very, what we call egocentric. we internalize it all, that I'm bad, I'm the one.
Of course.
And so what happens from a part's perspective is that many what we call exiles start to become formed, and we're very sensitive people, and we can be easily triggered because we've got many exiles, because we've had this confusion of this avoidant and anxious attachment parenting style.
So I'm just trying to think, there's a very sensitive part of me that if somebody pays me a compliment, I'm not too sure if they're taking the piss out of me or they're really paying me a compliment, or if there's a hidden agenda.
Mm-hmm.
So that could be it wants to accept it, but it's very untrustworthy.
That could be quite in line with the anxious attachment style, because even though so there's a lack of trust of self, we put more emphasis on the other, and yet there's also this wanting to go to the other, yet not trusting of that person.
Yeah, sure. And that's really disruptive.
Very disruptive.
I'm not too sure
yes.
what to do here.
Yeah.
I want that, but I don't want to get too close,
yes.
because ultimately I'll get hurt.
Yes, and it can be, you're longing, we're pulling that person towards us, and yet once they come close,
that's enough.
Yeah, because ultimately that parent or that caregiver hasn't been securely present and there for us. So.
And so, because sometimes we have multiple caregivers,
yes,
and we can have different attachment styles to each caregiver.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're not just I'm fully secure. I could have a secure attachment with, say, my mother, but I could have an anxious attachment with my father.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that raises a really good point. So it's kind of along the spectrum, and we have elements of all.
Yes. Yeah. I'm not just in one camp.
No.
Depending on who it is.
There is a tendency to
Sure.
be, once you hit more than 50% of a start, if you're more in the secure, most of the time, we tend to say that person's secure.
And then I could then notice that there's an anxious part of me
Yes,
arising.
at other times.
And now there's an avoidant part of
Yes.
me arising, but most of the time I'm really quite secure.
Yes.
So when we start to shift that maybe to an IFS perspective, could we say secure attachment would be the essence of self? Are we sort of saying that that's the case?
Yes, because secure attachment comes with all of those qualities of when you can feel calm in the space
Sure.
of another, when you can feel as though there's this easy shift between the comings and goings. So if I can come into my partner's space and be happy about that, and also when he leaves, also be okay with that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah?
So I'm not
I'm
feeling
calm.
anxious that he's left, or I don't care.
Yes.
It's actually because I have cared so much and it's been so overpowering and overwhelming to me. Now I'm actually shutting that down and I'm going to avoid that. Or is that another? That's obviously another part.
Another part.
So it's not
So
necessarily.
where my thoughts were going before is if you've got a secure attachment and you can allow that comings and goings,
Yes.
then I'm calm,
Yeah.
I'm confident,
Sure.
I have clarity within the self, I have courage to
Mhm.
be on my own as well as to approach another. I've got creativity, I'll go do something else. Or
And even
and
if I am missing that person, I'm still okay with that.
yes.
It's
and
not that I'm
because-
devoid of
No,
emotion.
I'm still connected to that
Yes,
person,
connected,
and I'm
sure.
also connected to myself
Yes.
and to source.
Yes. Cool. All right. Can you explain the quadrant? Because I find it, that I'm okay, you're okay.
Yeah.
That sort of.
Yeah,
concept?
this is something that I don't know, it was a bit of a flash that came through to me. I like to put it into a quadrant where you have one line as self and one line as others And so you have positive sense of self, negative sense of self along this axis. And on the others line, again, positive on the axis and negative on this axis. So when we have positive sense of self and positive sense of others, we have a secure attachment.
So
It's the I'm okay within myself and you're okay as well. We're both okay.
Yep.
There's a secure attachment that happens here.
Yep.
When I've got a positive sense of self, so I'm okay, but a negative sense of others, then that's when we are more independent and avoidant of others. Like, I don't need anybody, is what we've learnt. I can do this by myself.
So I'm okay, but you're not okay.
No, don't come near me. And so what you will see is that in this type of relationship, that this person really likes their own time. They're very independent. If they are approached by their partner to say, let's go and do this, they really struggle with that. They need time to surface to that. They need time to integrate the suggestion of doing things together. They don't like for their own time to be invaded upon.
Sure.
Yeah.
And what I've sort of noticed is that when people have an avoidant style, or those avoidant parts are present, there can be a greater opportunity to bypass feelings.
Yes.
Bypass experiences.
That's right. Just
sweep it away.
That's right. So this type of attachment style, they don't place much emphasis on relationships. That if that person left me, it doesn't matter.
It's because I'm okay.
Yeah. And I don't need to.
I'm okay and I don't need.
And I don't need to be considerate of my partner.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Because I'm all right. Like, what's their problem?
Yeah. So it's more, that's your shit.
Yeah.
Yeah. What you said really upset me. Maurice, I think that's actually your stuff.
Yeah.
That's not mine. So it won't even allow it to touch them. Because if it did touch them, it might actually feel. And
so again,
and I haven't been taught to feel.
No, we have parts that have been created to let's not go there. Let's not feel that.
Yeah. Yes, and that's the avoidant component of it. Yeah.
And then in this quadrant here, when we have a positive sense of others and a negative sense of self, we're very anxious. So I'm not okay. You're okay, but I'm not.
I'm not okay.
So this is where we're constantly trying to meet the needs of others.
Yes, the people pleaser.
At the expense of ourselves.
Yeah.
And then
also with that too.
Yes.
Very. They feel
a lot.
Feel huge amounts.
Yes.
Like especially consideration for others. There's huge amounts of. I'll compromise my values.
Yes.
For others.
Yes.
Because your happiness is more important than mine.
That's right. Yes.
And if the decision that I make leads to your happiness, then maybe I'll be seen as having great value, and you'll keep me around.
Yes. It
all
all comes
safe.
down to survival, to safety and survival.
Yeah.
And then when we have a negative sense of self and a negative sense of others, then we can be categorized in that disorganized. Like, I can't trust anyone.
I can't trust myself.
I can't trust myself, can't trust you.
Yeah.
It's said that Albert Einstein, he was asked a question of, if you could know the ultimate truth of any question, what question would that be? And his response was, is the universe friendly?
Yeah, is the universe friendly and supportive, or is the universe hostile and unfriendly?
Yes, because depending on what one's response to that question, it will then show how you interact in the world
Yes.
and in this. Because if you feel that the universe is friendly and that you are safe
I'm okay.
and you're okay, then I am secure
Sure.
and my relationships are secure.
Yes.
Yeah. If the world is unfriendly
Yes.
and they're going to attack me
Yes.
and you have fear,
Yes.
then you'll have either an anxious, depending on how you feel about self,
Yes.
or avoidant.
So can we move then to, I guess, so this model was suggesting that it's self and another. So secure attachment with another, anxious attachment with another, yeah? It's I'm okay, you're not okay, or you're okay, I'm not okay. So there was this sense of one and another. When we start to look at internal family systems, we go, okay, we understand that there's these relationships that we have with others. We're also then starting to look at, I've got a relationship with self and parts. And parts could be called defense mechanisms. Parts could be called ego states. Parts could just be called parts. So now we've got an internal family system where there is self and, in a sense, other selves which protect that sense of self. They were created at a particular time when self-energy was very young and very naive and not very wise, very, very innocent. So it didn't have enough self-energy to, in a sense, protect itself, so a part of it was splintered off to then protect it. So these parts have been forced into parental roles. And what they are doing is the parts are parenting self by protecting you. Whether that's an anxious protection, whether that's an avoidant protection, whatever it is.
Because we haven't had the role modelling from the primary caregiver.
Yeah.
Then if we haven't had that, then
so then the part may not have been created?
Well, there's less likely. So what I'm saying is, if we haven't had the role modelling, then the child needs to parent the self, yeah? So then the parts are created, yeah?
Because it's not happening from the parent.
That's right.
Right. So now the system creates, okay, well, we're going to create a parent.
Yes.
Within the system.
Yes.
Yeah, because we're still a child. So these parts are parentalised. And they're parenting the child, and as it's growing up, the challenge is that the part, when it gets pushed into these roles, it only ever looks out. So it's, okay, we've got to protect here, and it never actually turns around and sees that the child who was 3, the child that was 7, the child that was 11, when it got pushed into these roles, is actually growing. It's now 30, it's now 40, it's now 50 years old.
It's not in its vision.
It's not there because it's so focused on protecting. So now we're coming to this returning home journey, and rather than being parented by our parts, which are only 3 years of age, 9 years of age, 12, they haven't grown. They're still thinking that you're the 3-year-old.
They're frozen.
They're frozen in time. They're actually frozen in time. So through these conversations that we have with our parts, meeting the parts meditation, we're actually introducing ourselves to them, going, hey, I'm 52 now, man, this is what I've been doing. And then the parts go, oh, wow. And so we actually feel into the part and go, well, how does the part feel about, you letting it know that you're this age? It's surprised, it's shocked, it's amazed. So what we're doing is we're being self-led rather than parts-led. And what I mean by that is we're moving back to self becomes the parent of the part, rather than the part being the parent of the self. And so to reharmonise, to bring back that part into where it came from, to reharmonise and to reintegrate, that part needs to trust self, that it can actually do what it says it can do. So it can relinquish its role of protecting. And for the part to have a trusting relationship with self, it needs to have secure attachment. So how do we relate to ourselves? And this is the concept of, when we're talking about self-love is self-loving all of your parts. That is now another perspective of what self-love is. So when all of these parts come about, and your parts visit you every day, sometimes you're not aware that it's a part and you're blended with it and you are the part. So through the IFS model, what we're encouraging people to do is to speak for your parts, not from it. Okay, so it's about, once again, through this process, first I need to acknowledge that there's a part there. And then in the acknowledgement of that part there, I also need to acknowledge that there's self-energy here as well. So in this moment, I want you to think of a part of you, a behaviour that you do that you don't like, that you wish would be gone. Can you think of something? Yeah? Anyone want to share? What would you like to be gone?
My indecisiveness.
My indecisiveness.
Not trusting myself to make the decisions, always needing someone else to.
Yeah, not trusting myself, okay? So you'd like that gone?
I'd like that.
I'd like that gone. Okay, anyone else want stuff gone?
To not snap when the big red button's pushed.
To not snap when the big red button's pushed. I want that one gone too. Anyone else want stuff gone?
Numbing out from stuff.
Numbing out from stuff. I want that gone too. One more. Anyone else?
Lack of clarity.
Lack of clarity. All right. Now, to suggest that you want it gone would suggest that you don't necessarily have a loving relationship with it. So then I'd like to suggest to you that the part that wants it gone is another part. It's not actually you as self.
Because if it was self, it would be curious, it would be calm, it would have compassion, it would be wanting to connect with it, not trying to push it away.
Yeah.
All of those 8 C's that we had spoken of before.
So see how we can get tricked into, I want that, I don't like that. Actually, that's another part. It's the critical part. It's the judging part. Yeah? Yeah? It's judging. So see how the parts see other parts as not connected. They're separate. Yeah? And what I find really interesting here is that we're not aware, and I'm still learning this, is that, actually self-energy doesn't judge. Self-energy has great compassion. So if you could have compassion to all of your parts, then you know you're coming from self. But if you're
Or at
judging,
least if we can be willing to have curiosity or compassion, that's the start.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we are so blended with those parts, or sometimes we're so fused that we don't understand that there's actually value in those parts. And so could we at least start to be curious? Could we at least start to have some compassion for the role that part has been playing? And essentially, it's always everything is done in the service of survival.
Service of survival. Every behaviour has a purpose. Those parts have a purpose. They have particular roles. They've been put into those roles at particular times to protect the self, because the self didn't have enough energy to do it. And then they're not aware that they're actually part of one larger ecosystem, so then the parts fight. You'll have dilemmas. Dilemmas are when you've got two parts with opposing views, polarising views, having an argument. And you're over here and then you're over here. Or sometimes you're just watching this play out. And so you might be watching it play out, but you might be judging it. I wish you guys would just shut up. I'm sick and tired of all of you. So then that's another part. See? But I'm so blended to it, now I'm feeling that's what it is. Imagine if you spoke to you, well, probably do talk to our kids like that, but imagine speaking to your child like that. The impact from coming to an understanding of what attachment styles are and how we communicate, that circle of security, the language that we use. Yeah? So can I be aware of my internal dialogue of self with parts? And this is something that we're going to continue to evolve and offer. We actually want to start to run an IFS meditation course. So we're doing psycho-ed around internal family systems, leading you through guided meditations, which you can do yourself,
Yes.
because this work is about self. You can be your own therapist.
Yes, developing your own self-energy so that you don't need to rely on anyone outside of you.
Yes. And that's not from an avoidant perspective.
No.
That's from a secure perspective.
That's right.
Yeah. And then I can, and so there's some stuff that not requires, but can be aided in having somebody sit and hold space for you while the inquiry is done.
An example of that, so I had an experience today where I went into complete shutdown around the conversation that I'd had, and so in the overwhelm, so there was a part of me like yourself that went into, okay, let's just shut all of this down, and I don't even have any memory of the conversation, so it needed another to help me to remind me of the conversation and to inquire into that, so that part could be witnessed. And then there was understanding, and then there was compassion. Because prior to that, my day was, I was operating from a part.
Operating from a part, yeah.
There was confusion, there was lack of clarity, there was judgment. So it's important at times to have another to help you to see yourself, so that then you can develop more self-energy, and then to be able to see your parts more clearly. And actually for them not to necessarily have to step up at those times, because they know that the self has got this.
Yeah, so where you develop more self-energy, then the parts can feel a bit more relaxed in you holding that, and they can stand back and they can, oh, that's okay, I don't have to be working so hard today. But when they perceive that self hasn't got it, then they're going to jump in and do it. So when we look at the 8 C's are going to give you an indicator of when you're operating from self-energy. And if you look at the 8 C's, what I found with this is the only way that you can experience any of these 8 C's, calm, confidence, creativity, compassion, courage, is that if you are not feeling threatened.
When we feel safe.
When you feel safe. So if you're not in threat, then you'll be able to access these spaces. Other than that, it's going to be a part. And it's quite surprising when you start to inquire into this, how bloody noisy it is there and how many there are. Because remember, from an IFS perspective, we have poly mind. We don't have a mono mind. It's not one big ego that has all of these conversations. We don't actually have one big mind. It's poly mind. These are sub-personalities. Each one of these parts has its own energy, and you can feel it. Oh, we've got the procrastinator here. I know what that one feels like. I've got the one that wants to numb out. I've got the one that gets triggered and the red button is pushed and I'm gone. You know.
And just to let you know, the value in getting to know these parts, for them to be seen, to be witnessed, once they know that the self has got this now, not only do you develop more self-energy and you're less triggered at times, but also those parts are now a resource for you. So where one has lack of clarity and therefore has difficulty speaking, once that has been healed and integrated and there's more self-energy, then potentially that part might have the desire to sing, to speak, to teach. So they actually become even more, I don't want to judge what's better, because even in their protection, there's great value. So once they are integrated and self has this, they also are a resource. And now they are free to do what they want to do.
Because remember, they've been put into roles that may not necessarily have been their nature. And they're learning roles and they're protecting, and as they're learning to protect, they're gaining skills. And then when there's enough self-energy and those roles can be relinquished by the part, it chooses to, we can also ask the part, if you didn't have to do that, what would you like to do? And some of those parts might go, actually, I've learned all of these really great skills. Can I come and help you do these things? Or I'd just really like to go skydiving. Or I'd like to be creative. Okay, cool. I've got the perfect job for you over here. Working with us as we're moving forward in life, creating, rather than protecting. It's very different. You see, self-energy, no threat. Parts energy, threat. It's a different side of the fence. If they can have if they feel safe enough to let down their armour, I don't have to put this on anymore. And it's called the unburdening of the part. Makes sense. As it becomes unburdened, it then comes back into self-energy, and self-energy grows. Because remember, energy can neither be created or destroyed. It can only be transformed. We don't want to get rid of parts. We don't want to cut them out, or dissolve them, ignore them, suppress them. It's about reharmonising them. It's about reintegrating. It's their return home, and this is that circle of security. Once again.
So I think the key messages of what we wanted to bring here is mainly that there is self. Self has this capacity. It's always with you. It always has been with you. And that if we can begin to understand the purpose of these parts and to start to see them for the value that they have offered, and start to develop this self-energy. When we link that into attachment styles, the old or the previous way of attachment styles is that we needed to have secure attachment in order to have secure relationships. It can grow and change over time with effort and through another, yet with the IFS model, you are your own warrior. You are the one that can help to heal self. That's the thing that I really probably want to take home most around this.
Yeah, and also from the IFS model, what they're saying is that it is quicker to create a secure attachment with self than it is to create secure attachment with another.
Yes, because it takes time to develop rapport, and things happen in from day to day, and activation, triggering can happen. Whereas when it's with yourself, there's more trust in self that can be developed over time.
Yeah, and again, I guess then to just really encapsulate that too, that secure attachment with life. What type of, how do you feel about life? Are you avoiding life? Are you anxious about life? Or do you actually feel held by life? Because that's going to give you a good indicator of your own attachment styles. And once again, we can shift. At the moment I feel really safe and secure within life, so I'm maybe coming from self-energy. But later on in the evening I might get really anxious and I don't know what life is going to show me. See how I can transfer that to now I'm noticing that there's an anxious part. And so, and if I'm blended with it, if I am the part, then I'm thinking that this is how life is, rather than, once again, through mindfulness, I'm noticing there's an anxious part with me at the moment, and this is what it's wanting to say. So remember, I'm speaking for the part rather than from the part. So I'm not the part. And we've looked at that in many ways too. Cool.
Okay.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Alison, for joining me here on Tea with Mo. That's my manager part, just trying to close this off. So thank you all for joining us. We're going to end the Tea with Mo now. I'm going to actually let that run. So if anybody has any questions or comments, I'll let Sally come on in.
The interesting thing I always find is that obviously in relationships, you have relationships to items as well. So people can have an anxious relationship to money or avoidant relationship to money. I think it's a good thing to touch upon, or a house or a car or something. But also as well in that those parts, especially the protective parts, are generally stuck in time. So when it comes to timeline therapy, working with people, as you know, you'll find that part of them stuck in that moment. And I think that really regresses people's ability to grow and evolve. So I find a lot of people who are very fluid, especially when it comes to, let's say, evolution of their careers or different changing in relationships or open, they probably have less stronger parts that are more protected parts and more expressive that are stuck in timelines when it comes to, let's say, for a job role or something related to that, rather than something that's a bit more fluid, allowing themselves to just grow, evolve, and evolve. Thoughts?
There was a lot in that.
Yeah, okay. So talking about there can be different attachments to different, in a sense, items
Or
perceptions, even attachments to ideas around
definitely, yeah.
particular things.
So a good example is money, because everyone's
Yes.
always like, first things people say, I want to create more abundance in my life.
Yes.
Okay, then what's your attachment to money?
Yeah.
What part of you has a relationship with money that's affecting the manifestation of money?
Yeah,
You
yeah.
avoid it to money
Yeah.
because it creates these other parts. Feel like you have more responsibility, all these other things that come with that.
Yeah.
And then obviously there'll be cultural parts to that as well, because in Aboriginal community, if money comes in, you're expected to share it with everybody. So then there's that cultural part that comes in as well, which is
And it's a cultural part,
Yeah.
It's so when and see how we use the language and let's emphasise the word part around that as well. Yeah, there's definitely that, and Richard Dick Schwartz talks about legacy parts. That legacy parts can come in. We're actually born with legacy parts. It's not like here's this innocence and it's waiting to be fractured so it can create a part. It already comes in with a predisposition through a cultural perspective, and we can start to look at that from a genetic perspective. Yeah, so this could be epigenetics, and we can also then start to look at it from the perspective of here's our opportunity to heal ancestral traumas. So the ancestral traumas create legacy parts. So that was the way that he was then describing them too, which then influences how.
And so when you speak of one's relationship to money, there may be parts that are created because we're fearful of not having enough. It all comes to safety, and so there may be managers that can come in and are very, very driven. It's all about making as much money. There's never a limit, so it can be very empowering, and it can be to live in this materialistic world. They can be very beneficial, to have that fear of losing money, and yet if that happens, what is that? What does that mean for the one that it's protecting?
I'm wondering too if then parts have their own belief systems, So, you know, we can look at, look at the fat cats, look at the elites, all of this money, you know, this power and greed. I actually don't want to have anything to do with that. So see how there's a bit of a belief system that a part can gather.
Yes, and it may, if you link it into the attachment styles, the
Yes.
I'm okay, or you're okay, I'm not okay,
Yeah,
you know?
yes.
So that may then influence the beliefs that we
Sure.
have around money and
Yeah.
other people having money.
Yes, yes, yes. Or
It
even
forms the-
money, love, acceptance.
Yes, any
companionship.
item or theme or
Yeah.
the relationship that we have to
Yeah.
it, depending on our attachment style, which then forms the parts that are created.
Yeah, and so then bringing it back then, if I feel safe and I don't feel threatened, then I'm in self-energy. There's an abundance.
And there's freedom to
There's
be
more.
creative and
Yeah.
and go with the flow of
Yes.
life.
Anything other than that is a part.
I was also thinking yesterday about, so I was listening to, so to speak, they were talking about millions and millions of lifetimes. And then I was thinking, well, I've obviously then had, let's say, thousands of lifetimes with Christy. That's interesting. I wonder how many of those are influencing my decisions and how I interact with her right now. So I started a little bit meditating on it yesterday, and then obviously those parts of me from those lifetimes are now still affecting my relationship now and how I choose to interact or avoid or, you know, have anxious attachment. And then, so I thought that was quite interesting as well. But that, it's very, you could keep taking it out.
Sure. So now that's a fractalization
Yeah.
of multiple lifetimes all coinciding and impacting on this lifetime, and this lifetime also impacting those other multiple lifetimes.
And
because
science
it's
has
not linear, is
proven
it?
too
Yeah.
that one affects the other. You know, you can have can have a diamond, you know, light shining through this end,
Sure.
and it impacts the diamond in the other side of the world. So
A quantum entanglement.
that's right. So yeah, that opens up a whole.
So,
Yeah, okay. Can we just park that one at the moment? Is that
Well, I
one?
think it's something worthwhile, you know, to meditate on and inquire into. And you may not have the conscious ability to understand all of them, but I think having the open intention to, you know, clear some of those entanglements which no longer are serving, you know, this lifetime, and allowing myself to truly express myself as my greatest ability to love, then I think if I set the intention that I can maybe clear some of that stuff out and let some of that stuff go.
So when you use the word clearing, from a parts perspective, are we trying to get rid of parts? Are we saying that those parts have
Well, no, I was very, I'm just using that language now, but
Yes.
when I was doing, I was very, very conscious in the way of like honouring it, and
Yeah.
there's still lessons there as well for me to learn.
Yes, yeah,
As well.
yeah.
But I think that there's another thing I've done for a long time called light grids, and it's kind of similar to what's the stuff you've been doing lately, where you just go straight to source and just download the teachings. So in that, then okay, well, what's not serving me anymore that I'm still carrying along? Can I go straight to source, download the teachings, and allow myself to let that go, and still honour it, but just let it come through now, rather than still carrying the sword, you know, as per se.
So would that be then reflective that there's a part that is carrying that burden that can be released?
Or even that needs to.
Yeah.
Because if it's true self energy, then we don't need of anything. We are okay. We're whole.
And maybe even in that too is there because they talk about parts, and you can have self-like parts. So the part of you that feels as though it needs to release something may not actually be self.
Yeah. But I think you just blew my mind a little bit. I just had to epiphany. But let's say this is the microcosm. I'm right now is the microcosm. But as from my understanding is, so I'm just a small part of my major soul. Before then I go through the vow of becoming all that is. So right now, I'm just a part expressing from my major soul. And just then I just had the thought and feeling was, I wonder what then is the lessons or the teachings or the parts of myself that is expressed from my major soul, that are the themes that are coming through in this lifetime that I can actually learn and develop and move through.
And what would your parts say about that?
Yeah, that part, the part of that part.
Because it has the answers. When we tap in and ask, those parts have the answers.
Yeah.
So as you're questioning that, maybe we could question that part that has maybe posed that question, whether that's self or a part.
Yeah.
We just ask it and then listen as we will be listening tonight in conscious conversations.
Then if I bring this part into self, aligned with the true self, then do I shift timelines into another part of self which is not aligned to self,
Potentially.
to bring that back into alignment to self?
A part of me is really hurting. Yeah, potentially. Beautiful inquiry.
It is interesting.
So start to notice self-energy.
And
Start to
self-energy will be all of those 8 C's.
Yeah, and when you're not any of those 8 C's, then you're probably coming from a part. And then notice if there's another part judging that part, because then you get to know your parts. You know, we know thyself. Yeah. First, know self, then know parts. It's a lifelong mission that way.
Thank you, Maurice.
Yeah. Thank you, Alison. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you.